Jake had expected a medal and a handshake for rescuing the princess. Instead, the queen announced his engagement to her daughter before he could finish his after-action report, and he learned that some debts are paid in ways you never expect. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood rigidly at attention as General Karis Lark would finish detailing their successful rescue mission. He had expected a few rounds of applause, maybe the usual commendations for bravery under fire. Instead, Queen Vayra rose from her throne and silenced the hushed murmurs in the grand hall with an imperious wave. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she began, eyes narrowing as they fell on Jake. "By ancient law, you have saved the blood of Vel'Kari." She paused to let the weight of those words sink into everyone's minds before continuing, her voice steady and authoritative. "You will be my son-in-law." Jake's jaw dropped involuntarily. Beside him, Princess Thessara Vel'Kari looked equally horrified. Her dark hair fell in disarray around her face as she stared at the queen with wide eyes, then darted a glance at Jake that softened almost imperceptibly before regaining its defiance. The assembled court erupted into polite applause, murmurs of congratulations filling the air like an eerie fall. He tried to protest, but was cut off by the same gesture that had silenced everyone earlier, a single raised hand from Queen Vayra. "The matter is decided," she declared firmly. "Preparations for your wedding begin tomorrow." Her proclamation hung heavy in the room, drowning out all other sounds as Jake and Thessara stood still, gazing at each other like two strangers just told they were getting married. The idea was so absurd, so completely outside his experience of reality, that it took several seconds to process. Jake cleared his throat, stepping forward with a determination burning in his blue eyes. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully but firmly, I understand the significance of what I've done, and am honored by your gratitude, but this isn't something either of us asked for." Queen Vayra's violet gaze flicked to Thessara before returning to him, an imperceptible softness in her expression that vanished within a heartbeat. "By law," she repeated coldly, "the debt is paid with marriage." Thessara stepped forward beside Jake, her shoulders squared defensively as she met the queen's eyes without flinching. "Mother," she started to say, but was interrupted by the regal woman's sharp hand wave. "Silence!" the queen snapped, lips curling into a thin line of irritation and disappointment. "This is your choice, Thessara." She turned back to Jake with an unreadable expression flickering across her face. "Was that pity?" "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said slowly, as if speaking to someone half understanding the situation, "you have no objections?" Jake's mind raced wildly, but his mouth moved on its own accord. "If this is your law and your custom, I accept it with respect." Thessara's lips thinned into a straight L, an E of shock and anger before she managed to speak through gritted teeth, her eyes flashing between the queen and Jake like lightning strikes. "That doesn't mean I will," she hissed at both of them. The tension in the air was palpable as they stared silently across from each other for long moments. The court watched with bated breath, knowing that this awkwardly tense moment would shape the fate not only of their world, but also a human one far beyond it. Jake's gaze flicked back to Thessara, and then down at his feet where his hands were clenched into tight fists. "We're both stuck here," he murmured finally with an unsteady breath that didn't quite hide his rising panic or frustration. Thessara tilted her head slightly, a spark of something, maybe the understanding flashing in those violet eyes before she sighed heavily and nodded stiffly to Jake. The room seemed suddenly quieter as everyone waited for whatever might come next from these two mismatched individuals who would be married by dawn's light tomorrow morning. The queen surveyed them both with an almost maternal look of satisfaction, mixed uncomfortably with disappointment. "Very well," she conceded, standing taller in her regal gown, and silver hair cascading down around her shoulders like a waterfall of grace and authority. Jake nodded again to acknowledge the command before his eyes met Thessara's once more. They stood there together for another moment, strangers bound by fate and law, and then finally moved away from each other as if trying to find some semblance of space or distance in this new, impossible world they had just been thrown into. As Jake began making his way through the crowd towards a waiting aide with a message on a comm unit clutched tightly in one hand, Thessara turned around and walked quickly out of the hall. She left behind an echoing silence that was filled only by their footsteps fading away, leaving everyone else to contemplate what had just transpired. Jake's thoughts were racing as he hurried through corridors towards his quarters. This could not be happening, but it was already done. There would be no changing it now without severe consequences for both him and the princess. He needed time alone to figure out where exactly this left them and how on Earth, or Vel'Kari, they were going to navigate such a bizarre situation. Thessara, meanwhile, strode down hallways towards her own chambers, with thoughts of rebellion swirling inside her head, danger simmering beneath the surface as she realized what she had just been given. She didn't want this human in her life, but neither did it feel right for him to be forced into a marriage he clearly despised too. Their paths would cross again soon enough. There was no escaping that fact, and yet every part of them resisted each other with all the force of two colliding worlds clashing violently against one another. Neither had any idea how they were going to navigate such an impossible situation and survive it, but neither could deny their mutual determination. On neither Jake nor Thessara knew what tomorrow would bring, only that today was done, and now they both faced a marriage forged not by love, but necessity, on hope desperately against hope that somehow they'd find some way out of this mess before everything crumbled around them. Jake's hurried pace down the hall was met by a sea of curious and concerned faces, their gazes following him like a storm cloud on the horizon. He had to take a moment in his quarters before making any further moves. The news that tomorrow he would stand beside Thessara as her husband felt surreal, pressing heavily against his chest with each breath. His mind whirred like gears grinding into motion, calculating every step and consequence of objecting outright. Rejection was not an option. Conflict could start a war between two worlds neither were prepared to fight in the name of tradition or protocol. He needed time, a window, to understand this culture better and perhaps find a way out that honored both sides. In his room, he paused long enough only to grab some civilian clothes before stepping back into the hallway toward an aide who was already waiting outside Queen Vera's throne hall with an urgent message on Jake's comm unit. As they walked together down another corridor lined with ornate Vel'Kari tapestries depicting their ancient traditions and victories, the aide handed over a small device. "Sir," said the young aide formally, but with genuine concern in his eyes. "They expect your response now." Jake took it silently before turning back to face him fully, the comm unit cradled protectively between thumb and forefinger. "I know," he replied slowly, weighing each word carefully, as if measuring their impact on a scale of galactic importance. With one last nod at his aide, Jake strode toward the throne hall where Queen Vera awaited to hear what objection, if any, had regarding this sudden engagement. His heart pounded in his chest like an unsteady drumbeat. Every step closer made him feel more ensnared within a web of Vel'Kari tradition and politics. The door creaked open with deliberate slowness, as if protesting the weighty decision that would soon be announced inside. When Jake entered, Queen Vera stood alone in her throne room. She had dismissed everyone else to give him privacy for his objections or acceptance. Her eyes met his steadily without any hint of compromise on either side. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she began formally, but with an underlying note of something akin to expectation rather than demand. "I understand this is sudden and unexpected, yet it is binding according to our customs." Jake straightened up, feeling the weight of authority in her gaze, even as he tried to assert his own standing before these unfamiliar rules. He cleared his throat, taking a deep breath that seemed to shake off some of the dread settling around him. "Your Majesty," Jake began respectfully but firmly, "I appreciate your generosity and honor in offering this arrangement after saving Princess Thessara's life. However, our customs on Earth dictate something very different from here." Queen Vera's brows drew together slightly, at his words a subtle sign of her confusion mixed with patience for understanding what he was about to say. "I see," she murmured thoughtfully. "You believe my daughter is not worthy?" Her eyes locked onto him, sharp and piercing like the blade of a question slicing through any evasion Jake might wish to employ. It made his next words crucial beyond measure. "No," Jake replied sharply, but with a swift follow-up that clarified further. "In human culture, marriage requires mutual agreement between both parties involved, not an act dictated by fate or war debt." I did not agree. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly before they softened into understanding tinged with disappointment. "I see," she repeated slowly this time, as if allowing the weight of her own traditions to collide against his words. Jake took a step closer, trying again, but more carefully now, to bridge these two alien and human perspectives, while avoiding further offense or misunderstanding between them both. "Your Majesty, I deeply respect your customs here on Vel'Kari, but it's also important we understand each other's ways of doing things, especially when such significant decisions are involved." She regarded him silently for a long moment, her silver gaze analyzing his every word and gesture with the precision of an engineer inspecting blueprints. "Very well," Queen Vera finally conceded after what felt like an eternity. "A month then shall be granted to you both, a respite wherein you may get acquainted better under our laws." Jake's heart lifted slightly at her concession, yet a heavy burden remained pressing against his chest with the realization of what awaited him in this strange new life. "Thank you," he replied gratefully, despite knowing full well that merely surviving for another month did not guarantee resolution. "I will do my best to honor your customs." The Queen inclined her head regally before dismissing him with a wave, leaving Jake alone once more as he stepped back out into the hallway outside. Jake's mind buzzed as he made his way through the echoing halls of Vel'Kari Palace towards Thessara's chambers where she resided. The month had been granted, but it did nothing to ease the impending doom that hung over their heads like a storm cloud on the horizon. How could they possibly navigate such an impossible situation and come out whole? He found her standing by an open window, hands clasped behind her back, while looking out at Vel'Kari's bustling streets, far below illuminated in soft hues of twilight light. "Princess Thessara," Jake began cautiously as he approached the wide window sill where she stood. "I was given permission for a month to adapt." Thessara turned sharply, violet eyes narrowing first with suspicion, then shifting into surprise at his words. She had clearly been expecting something entirely different from him, and yet here they were facing this strange and sudden path together. "Adapt," she echoed back slowly, as if tasting the word on her tongue before asking more directly, "What exactly does that mean?" Jake hesitated for just a moment, searching in those intense eyes, until he found some glimmer of understanding flicker there despite their mutual unease. It was almost like finding common ground between two worlds otherwise torn apart by distance and cultural divides. "We need to figure out how we can navigate these customs," Jake explained steadily, as if reciting from an unspoken script both had come to memorize over recent days. "I won't be much use in saving you or your people if I don't understand more about Vel'Kari ways." Thessara watched him for another long moment before sighing heavily and nodding slightly, those violet eyes softening finally into reluctant acknowledgement. "I suppose there is merit to that," she admitted quietly, almost as though speaking not just to Jake, but also her own doubts. "But make no mistake, I did not ask for this any more than you." Jake nodded understandingly. He knew all too well how much they both resisted the hand fate had dealt them thus far. "Neither of us did," he agreed solemnly, before adding gently, "Perhaps we can find a way to turn our fates into something better in time." Her gaze flicked away for just an instant, then back again, with hardening resolve settling around her shoulders like armor against uncertainty and fear. Thessara's voice was firm when she spoke next. "Yes," she said decisively, turning fully towards him as though preparing herself for the journey ahead, even if it meant forging paths untried by Vel'Kari or human traditions alike. "Let us start there." And so began their uneasy alliance, born of necessity and survival against an impending union that neither truly wanted, but now faced together with hope rather than despair. Thus ended Chapter 2 as Jake navigated the complex web spun around him on Vel'Kari, beginning to find threads he could use not just for his own escape, but also to weave something new, a tentative start towards understanding and maybe even mutual respect amidst their forced marriage. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was led through a series of opulent corridors and grand archways to his new quarters within Vel'Kari's royal palace. His escort, a pair of silent guards whose silver armor gleamed in the soft lamplight, delivered him without fanfare before leaving him alone with only the heavy wooden door that secured him from further visitors. Jake's quarters were far more luxurious than anything had experienced on Earth or aboard any human vessel. Silk curtains draped over windows, allowing a panoramic view of Vel'Kari's capital city, its golden and amber hues reflecting off polished silver floors beneath his feet like stars against the night sky. But despite the grandeur, there was an unmistakable sense of being trapped within these walls. He moved to one window, pressing his hands against the cool glass as he surveyed the sprawling metropolis below, its towering spires reaching towards distant planets, and a bustling street life that never seemed to sleep. A chill ran down his spine. He had been granted a month by Queen Vayra for adapting, but every second spent here felt like an eternity closing in around him. What am I adapting to? What does this mean exactly? Jake's thoughts were interrupted as the door slid open quietly. He turned sharply towards it just as Princess Thessara Vel'Kari entered, her royal gown trailing behind her with a hushed whisper on the silver floors. She looked nothing like he had imagined before seeing her for real, lithe and elegant despite wearing what seemed to be one of the more restrictive styles favored by highborn females here. Her dark hair was neatly tied back in an intricate braid, yet her violet eyes bore into him with a piercing intensity that made his heart race. She strode over towards him without preamble, every step filled with palpable tension and anger. "You ruined my life," she spat out immediately, as soon as she reached the window beside which he stood, hands curled into fists at her sides. "I was betrothed to Duke Krath." Jake met those defiant eyes calmly. "I did not ask for this either." He paused before continuing softly, but with unwavering resolve. "But I saved your life because it was right, not because of any promise or reward." For a moment, Thessara's demeanor faltered. She had clearly expected some arrogant claim about duty, bound noblesse oblige from the human. Instead, all she got back was honesty and sincerity, a stark contrast to anything she'd encountered so far. Jake went on evenly, as if gauging her reaction carefully before deciding what came next. "We have a month now. Help me find a way out of this that does not dishonor either one of us, and I will take it." She studied him, and those sharp violet eyes tracing over his face for the first time since entering the room, searching perhaps for signs he might be lying or just spinning pretty words to ease her distress. But there was something genuine about Jake's expression. She saw a soldier who'd been caught in an impossible situation, but wasn't backing down. "Adapt," Thessara repeated slowly, as if testing how it would taste on her tongue, each syllable rolling off like a foreign phrase, still unfamiliar yet beginning to sound less threatening by the second. "You mean learn?" Jake nodded firmly while trying not to let any frustration show through his composed exterior about this whole mess being thrust upon them both. "Exactly." Thessara blinked rapidly once or twice before her expression shifted towards an almost imperceptible nod, though she still hadn't entirely reconciled herself with the strange turn their lives had taken. "I suppose there is merit to that," Thessara admitted quietly, after a long moment of contemplation, as if talking more to convince herself than him. "But make no mistake, I did not ask for this any more than you." Jake felt his heart squeeze slightly at her words, despite knowing full well how much they'd both resisted the hand fate had dealt them thus far. He understood that acceptance and adaptation were hard-won battles in an impossible scenario. "Neither of us did," he agreed solemnly, adding gently, After a pause, perhaps we can find a way to turn our fates into something better with time. There was another long moment, where Thessara's gaze flicked away for just an instant, as though gathering her courage before turning back fully towards him. Her shoulders straightened slightly, and there was hardening resolve settling around them like armor against uncertainty. "Yes," she said decisively this time, finally meeting his eyes, with no room left for doubt or fear in hers now that a path forward seemed to be forming between two very different beings navigating shared circumstances they had neither chosen nor wanted. "Let us start there." Jake watched her closely, saw the shift from hostility and disbelief to something approaching acceptance, tinged heavily by pragmatism about their mutual fate going forward. He offered Thessara one of those steady, reassuring smiles he'd perfected back on Earth as a way to settle nerves in tense situations. "All right," Jake said firmly, after another beat passed between them. "Let's get started then." With that, they both turned away from the window together and moved towards more practical matters. Jake could see his quarters now were serving not just as temporary accommodation, but also potentially as starting points for real negotiations, with Thessara aimed at understanding each other's cultures better amidst all this sudden change. Their journey was far from easy or straightforward. Customs, traditions, expectations of Vel'Kari society, and its rigid hierarchy seemed alien to Jake's logical mind, accustomed more readily to the egalitarian structures found within human military ranks. Yet every step taken brought them closer, not just in mutual goal, but also towards understanding where each stood when it came down to personal beliefs versus societal pressures. The first few days were spent mostly observing. Thessara would take him through various rituals and ceremonies while explaining their significance, though Jake struggled with the idea of bowing before Queen Vera every single day simply because she decreed so without asking for consent. Meanwhile, Thessara showed him how even minor infractions against Vel'Kari customs could be seen as major insults elsewhere on her world. But despite these challenges, or maybe Jake Thessara Vel'Kari Jake Thessara Jake Thessara Jake Jake Thessara Jake Thessara Vel'Kari Jake and Thessara walked silently down a dimly lit corridor of the Vel'Kari palace, their steps echoing softly against the polished metal walls. Tension between them had lessened somewhat since their first encounter in the Queen's chambers, but remained palpable nonetheless. "Do you have any ideas about where to begin?" Jake asked, breaking the silence with his steady voice. "I've been looking through some of these ancient scrolls, trying to find a loophole or something that might work." Thessara glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, and then turned back towards one of the many books scattered around in an adjacent room filled with artifacts from Vel'Kari history. "I have found nothing," she admitted quietly. "The traditions are rigid, but I think it's possible to understand them well enough that we can find a way out." Jake nodded thoughtfully as they entered another chamber dedicated entirely to the laws and customs of their society. Bookshelves lined every wall, filled with ancient scrolls written in Vel'Kari script and bound volumes detailing various ceremonies and regulations. "Maybe there's something here," Jake said optimistically, reaching for a particularly thick volume at random. "Let me see if I can translate this." Thessara sighed softly, but didn't argue as she took out her own device to work on translating similar texts alongside him. The air between them was filled with the sound of rustling pages and hushed conversations. "Do you think your people would accept an alliance instead?" Jake suggested after a while, trying his hand at another approach different from direct disobedience against tradition. "Like if we were seen as equals in this union?" Thessara's expression softened slightly for just one moment, glimmering with the hint of hope and possibility. "That is interesting," she mused aloud, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "But my mother would never allow it without significant negotiation." "Then let's negotiate," Jake replied firmly. His determination showed through in his clear blue eyes that met hers directly now without any hesitation or fear. With renewed vigor, Thessara began to explain some of the lesser-known customs and nuances of Vel'Kari society. "Here's one thing," there is a tradition called the right of council. It allows for significant figures like myself to assemble with other nobles under specific circumstances. Jake leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued despite knowing little about such practices. And how can we use this? A council could potentially be assembled where both our concerns are heard and discussed, Thessara explained further, but it requires a clear reason for calling one and presenting strong evidence of merit for its necessity. He nodded slowly, absorbing the information while also thinking aloud on ways to present their case effectively. What if we gather evidence that demonstrates how this union isn't in either our best interest or even harmful? He pondered out loud. We need something concrete before approaching anyone, though. As they continued delving deeper into potential solutions late into the evening, Thessara and Jake's initial mutual distrust gave way to genuine camaraderie mixed with an undercurrent of burgeoning affection. Her defiant violet eyes softened when she laughed at one of his jokes during their meal break. Your sense of humor is surprisingly human, she said with a small smile playing on our lips. Jake returned the favor, noticing how Thessara's once stern demeanor was beginning to ease up around him. And your tenacity and intelligence have impressed me quite a bit too. His voice had dropped into something warmer, less formal, as he spoke directly from his heart. We're both stuck in this situation, but can at least make the best of it. Duke Krath watched their interactions with growing irritation from afar through small spy cameras hidden around key locations within the palace walls. He had been tasked by Queen Vera to eliminate Jake should any chance present itself for him and Thessara's alliance to succeed. Seeing how closely they worked together, he knew his plan would need acceleration, or else risk losing control over this unexpected turn of events altogether. Meanwhile, back in their chambers, after another long day spent studying customs and laws side by side, Jake finally approached a topic that made them both tense up slightly yet also excited for some measure of normalcy amidst chaos. Hey Thessara, he began gently one night, when they had finished reviewing Vel'Kari history. I've been thinking, how about we start practicing small courtesies? Like if I learn more about your world, could you teach me to dance? She looked taken aback for a second before her lips curved into an almost reluctant smile. I suppose that's reasonable, she said finally with just enough warmth in her voice to make Jake feel hopeful again. Although dancing might be the least of our concerns. He chuckled lightly at this, realizing how true it was, but also glad they could find moments like these amidst the stress. Their bond strengthened further each day as they continued working together towards a solution that would honor both their peoples while avoiding undue harm. Little by little, Jake and Thessara found themselves growing closer, not just out of necessity for survival, but because deep down inside each had started to care deeply about one another's well-being despite all odds. The chapter ended here with the establishment of an alliance between Jake Morrison and Princess Thessara Vel'Kari, as they sought a way out through mutual respect, understanding, and shared objectives against formidable cultural traditions. As days turned into weeks on Vel'Kari Prime, Jake Morrison and Princess Thessara continued their clandestine efforts to navigate the intricate web of Vel'Kari customs in search of a solution that would preserve both traditions while allowing them some measure of personal freedom. Despite their growing mutual respect and understanding, tension loomed large over every step they took. One evening, as dusk settled into twilight, Jake was summoned by Duke Krath's emissary to attend an impromptu gathering within the palace grounds. The invitation came without explanation, but with a clear sense of urgency that sent shivers down his spine. He glanced at Thessara, who stood nearby, her expression guarded yet concerned. Be careful, she said softly as he approached her chambers for what seemed like their final meeting before facing whatever awaited him outside. I will, Jake replied firmly, clenching his jaw in determination, and I'll do my best to find out why this is happening. Minutes later, at the gathering place, set up under a large pavilion adorned with crimson banners and flickering lanterns, Duke Krath himself greeted Jake formally, yet coldly. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, he began without preamble once introductions were made. It has come to my attention that you have been working closely with Princess Thessara against the wishes of Queen Thessara. Jake's heart pounded as he realized this confrontation was a trap laid specifically for him, and potentially aimed at silencing their efforts. We are merely trying to find a way forward, Jake argued calmly, maintaining eye contact despite his rising anxiety. Nothing that would harm any Vel'Kari custom or tradition. Duke Krath smirked dismissively before gesturing towards another man standing behind him, a tall figure with stern features and sharp eyes, indicative of someone trained in combat. Captain Zarth of the Royal Guard has brought an interesting challenge, Duke explained coldly. He claims that under Vel'Kari law, challenging a human who interferes with royal affairs is justified. Jake felt his stomach drop as Captain Zarth stepped forward, holding out what appeared to be ceremonial blades adorned in intricate gold engravings. Champion Jake Morrison, the captain intoned formally but pointedly. You have saved Princess Thessara from pirates yet intruded upon Vel'Kari affairs without permission or knowledge of our laws. By right and honor, I challenge you to a duel for her hand. Jake's mind raced through possible responses. Refusal was seen as dishonor in such situations, while accepting meant almost certain death against trained warriors. Very well, Jake said slowly, after deliberating briefly. I accept your challenge under the condition that it be overseen by neutral parties, including members from both our worlds, to ensure fairness. Captain Zarth's expression twisted into a sneer, but he nodded reluctantly, agreeing to the terms, knowing this was now official and irreversible. Prepare yourself then, Captain Zarth spat out with disdain. The duel will take place at dawn tomorrow, under the eyes of Vel'Kari tradition. Should you lose, Jake interrupted him sternly, cutting short any further threats or conditions. There is no need for additional stipulations, Jake said firmly, returning to his chambers feeling a mix of dread and resolve weighing heavily upon him. Back in their shared quarters, where Thessara awaited with anxious eyes staring at the flickering light from candles dancing across walls, Jake recounted everything that transpired, including Duke Krath's ominous warning about an impending duel against Captain Zarth. Her face paled as she realized the gravity of what was happening. No, she breathed out sharply, clenching her fists tightly by sides. This can't be allowed to happen. I know it seems dire, Jake said soothingly but sternly, at seeing her distress escalate. But we must stay focused on finding a way through this together. She nodded slowly, swallowing hard before asking more quietly, is there any chance you could withdraw your claim? Jake shook his head, firmly, even as Thessara's eyes pleaded silently with him. That would dishonor everything I stood for when rescuing you, he explained solemnly. I've already risked my life on you, had as one more time to uphold the integrity of what we both believe in. Her expression softened slightly then, staring back at Jake with a mix of admiration and sorrow evident within her defiant violet gaze. You would die for my honor? Thessara asked quietly, still struggling internally with this unspoken bond they forged despite all obstacles placed before them. A small smile curved his lips gently as he met those questioning eyes head on without flinching away from the gravity behind it all. I already risked my life once, Jake said softly yet determinedly. What is one more time? Thessara blinked back tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks, a rare moment of genuine vulnerability showing through layers built up over countless lifetimes following rigid Vel'Kari customs and duties strictly enforced under Queen Thessara's iron grip. Thank you, she whispered finally, after several long moments shared in silence. For everything. Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly before stepping away to prepare for his inevitable confrontation against Captain Zarth, a duel not just for personal honor, but also the greater good of their respective worlds caught at crossroads between conflict and peace. The next morning dawned cold and clear as Jake stepped out into Vel'Kari's royal arena, where a crowd had already gathered eagerly anticipating today's events. His heart pounded in his chest, while adrenaline surged through every fiber as he faced off against Captain Zarth amidst solemn rituals being performed by the royal priests overseeing this challenge. As preparations concluded and both combatants took their positions facing each other across the sandy ground, Thessara watched from behind a protective barrier, alongside Queen Vaera herself, who merely observed without any hint of emotion or concern etched onto her silver-skinned face. Her ancient eyes remained focused solely on Jake, as if seeing through every layer separating them towards whatever future awaited, now sealed within these moments about to unfold. Jake and Thessara's story continued here amidst the tension, knowing that everything hinged upon the single moment in time where principles were tested against tradition, while love blossomed despite insurmountable odds stacked heavily against their favor. The duel would be fierce but fair, yet neither could escape from the reality hanging over them like a dark cloud ready to burst forth at any given moment. And the morning sun cast a pale glow over Vel'Kari's royal arena as Jake stood in the center of the sandy ring, facing off against Captain Zarth. The crowd murmured with anticipation, their voices blending into a low hum that seemed to pulse through the air like an unspoken countdown. Thessara watched from behind a protective barrier, alongside her mother, Queen Vaera, who remained stoic and unmoved by the tension. Jake's heart raced as he scanned his opponent. Captain Zarth was a seasoned warrior with scars etched into his dark skin, each one a testament to battles fought for Vel'Kari's honor. Captain sneered at Jake, clearly seeing him not just as an enemy, but also as a symbol of the changing times. "Ready yourself," said Meron, the chief priest, who stood between them with a ceremonial dagger in hand. "This duel is about tradition and justice." Jake's fingers tightened around his weapon, a blade that felt both familiar and alien in his grip. He had trained extensively back on Earth, but this was different. Here, each strike could mean not just personal triumph or defeat, but also the fate of two worlds. "Begin," Meron commanded, tossing the dagger into the air as a signal for combat to commence. Zarth wasted no time, lunging forward with swift precision that caught Jake off guard. They clashed in midair, metal rang against metal as their blades met and slid away from each other's hold. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead, despite the cool morning breeze. Thessara held her breath, eyes glued to every movement of both combatants. When she first heard about the duel, anger had surged through her veins, anger at being forced into a marriage she didn't want, and fear for Jake, who was now thrust into an alien arena where he could be severely injured or worse. But as the battle progressed and Jake's skill became clear, Thessara felt something else stir within her, a mixture of pride and admiration. He fought not just to win, but also with an unwavering sense of justice that mirrored his own beliefs about what was right in their universe. Suddenly, Captain Zarth broke through Jake's defenses with a powerful strike, forcing him back several steps before launching into another series of attacks aimed at weakening the human's resolve. Thessara gasped as she saw blood start to seep from beneath Jake's uniform where his shoulder had been grazed during one particularly vicious blow. "Jake!" she called out in concern, her voice barely audible over the crowd's shouts and chants for their respective champions. But he didn't look back or falter. Instead, with a deep breath that steadied both body and mind, Jake pushed himself forward again to meet his opponent head on once more. His eyes locked onto those of Thessara briefly before turning fully towards Zarth in renewed determination. From her vantage point next to the Queen, she watched as Jake's resolve hardened into something almost fierce, something that spoke volumes beyond mere words or gestures about what he was willing to do for them both. Thessara suddenly felt a surge of emotion rise up within herself. She knew this duel wasn't just about proving his worthiness, it was also about her own honor, and whether she could stand beside him willingly in the face of ancient law mandating their union by blood debt rather than choice. With a quick glance towards Meron, who nodded solemnly upon seeing her resolve, Thessara sprang into action. "Wait!" she shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear as Zarth went for another blow aimed directly at Jake's vulnerable position mid-retreat from previous attack pressure. "I invoke the law of personal combat." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion and awe. The Vel'Kari tradition allowed a challenged party to choose their own battle conditions if they deemed it necessary for clarity or fairness in resolving an issue directly related to one's honor. "No," Jake began immediately, concern clearly visible on his face as he saw where this was going even before Thessara clarified with Miran via hand signals indicating her intent. "You don't have," but she silenced him gently with a look that spoke of both respect and trust between them, by now forged not just through necessity, but mutual respect and growing affection. "Silence, Jake," said Thessara firmly yet kindly as he started to object further upon realizing what was happening around their situation. "This is my choice." Miran nodded in approval once more before turning back towards the crowd with a raised hand requesting silence, amidst increasing murmurs of surprise from spectators, uncertain about this sudden change. "Captain Zarth," Thessara called out clearly now, addressing her opponent directly, "I challenge you personally to uphold my honor as well as your own." Zarth's sneer vanished momentarily, replaced by confusion, and then begrudging respect towards the princess for stepping forward thusly. Amidst these unprecedented circumstances surrounding their engagement predicament, he met Miran's gaze with a nod indicating he would accept this offer. "Very well," Zarth said coldly, but without further challenge or refusal. "Let us see what you are made of, princess." Jake stepped back even as Thessara walked forward confidently towards her opponent, now standing across the sand from where she began. He watched in stunned silence until Miran approached him again briefly. "Your honor is restored," said Miran quietly with a nod towards Jake, before leaving to oversee proceedings between Thessara and Zarth, officially sanctioned under law invoked by former challenged party. Jake stood there for several long moments afterwards, staring at the scene unfolding around where his wife-to-be now faced off against her supposed challenger. The crowd fell silent once more, watching as tension mounted visibly amidst preparations were set for new combat conditions. Thessara and Zarth circled each other warily, blades drawn, but held back slightly in a display of mutual respect towards one another's status within Vel'Kari society, despite current conflicting dynamics due to recent events surrounding their engagement predicament. Thessara moved fluidly with confidence born from years training under Vel'Kari combat standards. Every strike and parry was met head-on by Zarth, who seemed equally unafraid of her abilities. "Begin," Miran intoned again, as formalities concluded for these new battle conditions, initiated solely through personal challenge rather than societal mandate enforced previously. The duel began with swift precision from both combatants. Thessara's movements were fluid and graceful, each strike aimed at Zarth's defenses, while also maintaining defensive postures necessary to avoid counterattacks themselves. Jake watched in awe of how naturally she seemed to flow amidst these conditions, despite her initial hesitance regarding this arrangement. Zarth struck first with a flurry of quick attacks designed to disorient Thessara from momentary advantage he felt over her standing due merely being designated as challenger status rather than outright opponent. But Thessara proved resilient, shifting rapidly and counterattacking decisively whenever openings presented themselves in Zarth's own defensive stance. Jake could see the subtle nods of respect exchanged between Miran and others, observing match now that formalities had been completed officially via personal challenge invoked by Princess herself. Amidst these changing dynamics surrounding their engagement predicament rather than merely societal mandate enforced previously, under law mandating union due to blood debt owed from rescue scenario involving her life. Thessara's movements grew increasingly confident as the duel continued, each strike and Perry reflecting a deeper connection forming between them beyond mere combatants engaging in formal challenge. Jake saw Thessara grow bolder with every successful defense against Zareth's relentless onslaught. Their confidence shone through in Jake. Thessara, 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 Jake, Jake Queen Vaira, Vaira, Jake Thessara, Jake Thessara.